Today we are joined by Brigid Taylor from Dreadnought. She's a director at Dreadnought Capital. Brigid, before we get into all of that, we've got quite a Madiba show today. We're going to be talking a lot about Nelson Mandela. Did you have the privilege of meeting him?
I didn't meet him personally, but you know, it's really drawn to mind. You know, he's going to be missed for sure, but never ever forgotten. And one of the things that makes you proud to be a South African, and certainly a child of South Africa, is that he was our Tata Madiba, and hopefully we can live the legacy that he's left behind. Certainly for each of us, you know, it is a big legacy to step into, but I think going forward, people should ask themselves the question, what would Madiba do?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? The one thing I'll never forget about him was shaking his hands. He had hands the size of soup plates, and they were leathery. I read it somewhere else. One of the reporters actually made that point. I think it was John Carlin who wrote the book on Invictus. And he spoke about his leathery hands, and I remember that as well. Very from all the manual labour that he did. But we'll be talking more about Madiba later in the show. There's that big breaking news story. I know you haven't had a chance to really go through it, but let me just unpack it for you. And for those who haven't been following the story over the years, some years back, what happened was that Kumba Iron Ore did a deal. Well, when Escor, as it used to be, was split up, Kumba went on the one side to do the iron ore side, and ArcelorMittal did the steel. And they did a deal between the two of them, because ArcelorMittal took most of the debt, that ArcelorMittal would get iron ore at a very low price at cost plus 4% indefinitely. This was structured through the mineral rights at the main Sishen operation. Now those mineral rights were due for renewal. Kumba went ahead and renewed its rights. ArcelorMittal did not renew its rights. It was supposed to do it by a particular time. It forgot. The Guptas and a company called ICT swooped in, somehow managed to get those mineral rights signed over to them, and a court case ensued. Today, the Constitutional Court has finally ruled on the matter, and it has ruled that ICT and the Guptas have got no right whatsoever to those mineral rights. And in fact, those mineral rights, the only people who are entitled to them is Kumba or Sishen Iron Ore Company. So that's all behind us. Kumba and ArcelorMittal have now done their transaction. They will continue business as usual. And I think, Brigid, that was a lot that I had to say, but for international investors who were concerned that there might have been skullduggery here, this is a very good decision. Very, very good outcome. I think that's a huge relief, to be honest with you. I mean, especially because these are core sectors of our economy. So yeah, without a doubt, in terms of our foreign direct investment, it will definitely bode well, and that is quite significant. So good news, yeah, that is a great outcome. You'd wonder if it had anything to do with the resignation this week as well of the ArcelorMittal CEO, because it was negligence that they did not renew their mineral rights, and I guess someone has to fall on their sword. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's a costly exercise if you don't get it right, and as you've seen, I mean, the kind of outcome that then ensues and the cost implications are massive, as well as the sustainability of the operation. So, yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I haven't read the whole article and I haven't seen the breakdown, but certainly, yeah, it bodes very well. It's on Sense at the moment, so anybody who's really excited about it can go and read what the official judgment is. From a broader perspective, it's not going to have a direct impact on the South African rand, no doubt. But how are you reading the rand at the moment? You know, the rand at the moment is pretty much range bound, because we're kind of getting to that middle sector of the month. A lot of people going on holiday. As we know, South Africans enjoy their summer holidays at this time of the year, so most people are leaving now over this weekend, and they're probably only returning middle of Jan. However, we have got FOMC, which is the US Federal Open Market Committee next week, as well as our own MPC, which will keep expectations in terms of volatility relatively low, because there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not we will in fact see a Fed tapering in this next decision, based on the great outcome with regards to their latest round of data. On the South African side, it looks as though the SARB will probably remain a little bit hawkish, and we saw our inflation figure yesterday had come back. However, the core inflationary issues still remain, and that's, you know, we can talk about the e-tolls and all of these cost push pressures that are impacting consumers. You saw it in the retail sales numbers. These kinds of things point to an economy that does need to sort itself out and restabilize, and certainly the structural imbalances are a little bit of a concern. So the SARB at the moment, very blunt tools, and I think the market's just getting its feet. Like I said to you before, unfortunately, if the tapering does come to the fore, we can expect further rand weakness.
You mentioned that the CPI data does highlight the structural issues that we have in the country, as well as the current account numbers that were out last week. So this is not something that we can solve in a year, perhaps.
Not at all. I think, you know, what we've got to keep in mind is that we're in an economy right now that still remains as a net importer, and unfortunately with the rand being at the levels it is and continuing to weaken, it does pose those upside risks for further debt, etc., because the government spending is going to continue, hopefully, and what you're starting to see is that consumers are getting more and more pressurized. I was reading an interesting article about disposable income with regards to the e-tolls in Gauteng particularly. I mean, that's going to impact people's disposable income anything between sort of 500 and 800 rand a month for people that use those roads regularly, and that's quite a significant impact.
Maximum 550, remember?
Yes, well,
if you have an e-tag.
If you have an e-tag. If you don't have an e-tag, it could be a lot higher.
But there's 85% of people who don't have e-tags.
But now there's a lot of controversy that might be an inflated number.
No, 85 don't have it.
85 don't have
it,
absolutely.
Says,
well, that's the concern. I mean, and how many people live in Pretoria? How many people need to utilize those roads? What are the alternatives? We've seen what the impact's been on our traffic. But really what the big question is, you know, we're not seeing income catch up with inflation. So we're not seeing people getting those 5-6% increases annually, but the cost push pressures continue. And these are things that are definitely going to impact our economy if we do not create employment and start to create some other form of revenue.
From a more specific thing, we saw another property listing on the JSE today, Accelerate, a 6 billion rand property trust that owns the Fourways Mall and lots of other properties in Fourways. I guess when companies from a particular sector come for listings, it tells us something.
Well, that is actually quite interesting because, I mean, if you keep in mind, it depends how the package was set up in terms of the fact that you're still borrowing at almost all-time and low interest rates. So from that perspective, funding is relatively cheap. If you can get investors to invest in your portfolio and then you manage to offlay that debt into your retail sector or your rentals or whatever, you can generate quite good income. So it's not necessarily, if you're talking about that type of property sector, it's not a bad investment vehicle if you have a long-term view in terms of sustainability and the growth in South Africa. You know, on the back of that, if we look at the US growth, you know, the developed markets, particularly the UK and even the Eurozone, starting to see slight upticks in terms of their growth trajectory. I was looking at numbers this morning and the global growth projection now being outlook improving to 3.4% next year, which is a little bit optimistic, but nonetheless what it does show us is that our counterparts who potentially will, you know, grow our export sector will be growing. So hopefully that starts to see some form of momentum in South Africa.